All right. We still got one or two more folks coming in. We'll give it about 30 seconds before we start here. Oh, the folks in the back. I always wonder when the folks are back, like in the back there, is it because it's a quiet place to open the old laptop? And oh, power. Ah. Yeah. I have a really thin phone with a giant battery case, I have found. People are always like, dude, what's with that phone? But I travel, so this thing's the only thing that lasts all day.
Well, the front row is the spit row, so.
Nice. Alrighty, I think we're gonna get started. Gonna throw that out of my pockets. Altoids, things you need at these things. All right, so wow, this is my third one today. I got one more after this. It's a little crazy. Hopefully you guys are having a good show here. It's always starts to get a little lighter on the second full day in the afternoon, I've noticed. Wait till you see tomorrow, right? It starts to thin out as people go. Though I hear that the party's supposed to be pretty cool. It's going to be at the Hard Rock. They did that 2 years ago. That was neat. All righty, we're going to get started. So, hi guys. As you probably have seen as I have been peppering the activity wall and hopefully you came by our booth. I'm Todd Rossin, CEO, Chief Strategist for IDMWORKS. I've got you as an audience here for a long one, so I'll try to make it a little more entertaining, if at all possible, because I know these things can get long in the tooth. So I plan to have a song and dance show with this. What we're doing here today is we're going to talk about IDMWORKS's, I don't want to say best practice, but what and how we see this non-employee identity issue. What we've seen in the field, we've seen as options, what we've seen as pitfalls as well. This is one of those things that I don't think anybody thought was going to be this difficult, right? Where we have these groups that are not employees, they're not under our HR, that we have to manage within our system on sometimes very little information. So I'm going to start moving the slides forward here a little. This is for anyone who's seen me on these, I try to do this in 1 minute or less, so as not to bug you with the shameless self-promotion. That'll come at the end. We've been around since '04, and we're actually probably closer to about 150 employees now. We do it all within the IAM space. We're probably a large version of a boutique shop at this point. Consulting, implementation, hosted, so managed services from hosting, SOC 2 compliancy, outsourced services or managed support services, as well as custom development. If you have a legacy tool out there at this point, there's a chance you may actually have one of our connectors because they get resold by the likes of Oracle, SailPoint has done some Ping, Microsoft, so like a FIM or a MIM or an OIM and the like. It's possible. Anyways, you'll notice at the end the non-employee identity suite. I will hit you with that at the end just briefly because this isn't really supposed to be a sales thing and I'm not here to sell you and I'm not your sales guy. I don't even know if any of our sales guys showed up for this. Remind me to spank them later. Huh? Anyone? He is? Where are you at? Oh, no, I meant in the room. Oh, we brought like 11 guys. Yeah, we brought a lot. All right, so I'm going to get out of this slide now, and let's get into this. All right, so what is this problem that we're referring to? Well, the fact that we're getting people in this room, I assume people are running into this thing, right? Employees, if we've done our job, and we don't always do our job so well within our organizations, we have more to track them on because we have rules around them. What are we talking about? Well, you have an HR system. Your HR system has a certain amount of tracking and accountability because they're got to make sure you get paid, that you have your benefits, that they follow certain regulations, right? In this country, they have to follow some specific data compliancy laws, healthcare related compliancy laws as well, things like COBRA, for example, for people that leave the organization. Depending on the state and different rules, they may have to turn around people's final paycheck in a day or 2 weeks, or when they come on board, they have to make sure that you have healthcare that before, or if you're going to transfer over from something, or especially when you leave, if you don't want to do COBRA, different aspects of the job that fall into place. So why this is important, well, I think we all know, but the key being that the status should always be known. Now, we know there's pitfalls there. I'm sure you have had that one where HR goes, John's not here anymore? When did he leave? Or when did he run out of the session? Right at the beginning, 5 minutes in, for example. Oh, there we go. It's okay. I won't hold it against you. I know where you live. Offboarding as a result, onboarding, offboarding, it's enforceable, assuming your HR even knows about it, which is sort of the hang up there, right? You find out that the HR folks aren't always the first to know when you deprovision, so to speak. You remove somebody from the organization, and that's a problem. However, for the most part, they've got that full transparency in the fact that they can look up the person's information. They have tracking data about them. There is a certain amount of accountability. It's their job at the end of the day. That's great. So employees score, non-employees not so much. When we talk about tying them into provisioning, it's usually, what is your HR system? Sometimes you'll have the international aspect of it, and you have multiple HR systems. But the point is, there's HR systems you can tie into an auto-provisioning solution or a service desk solution or the like to make sure that these people get onboarded. Now, that onboarding could take you 4 weeks, and I've talked about that in many sessions, and hopefully you can get that down to 4 minutes, 4 hours, something that's a little more palpable. But the trick is having that information, which we don't always have when we go to the non-employees. So, okay, we look at this here now. Employees 1, non-employees still 0. Non-employee information, what's the problem? It's all over the map, right? We got vendors and vendor solutions, and what happens there? Man, I got 12 different vendors. Each one does something a little different. They just hand us data, put it in, and we got this guy, Todd Rossin, and he comes into the organization as they put him in. I don't have any data about him. What do I require? His name, maybe. What else do you require? Well, it gets a little tricky, especially because, let's just change it, and now it's John Smith. John Smith comes into the organization, and you know what? We don't know how he's coming in the organization. Maybe it was a vendor, maybe it's some other system, maybe we have something tied in. That's great. And you know what? He turns out he's kind of a bad dude. So we need to walk him to the door. So something came up, he gets walked to the door. Or I don't know, he got sick and tired of the place one day and he slapped the CIO in the face, which we all wanted to do, but he actually did it. So he got walked to the door. Well, we got a problem now because 2 years later, with another vendor, they brought John Smith back in. He's in, he's been here for 2 months now, he's been working. Nobody noticed we're a big organization until he walked by. And what happened? Somebody recognized him. Oh my God, that's the dude who smacked the guy in the face, the CIO. That's a problem, tracking. And then we go try to do a root cause analysis. And how the heck do we do that? How do I know what he had before? We're gonna talk about where these things get stored. But even so, how do I track that data? What am I keeping about him? Do I have an SSN, right? Do I have something else? An address, a unique code, at something that you can track this person in the past? Or better yet, you know what? He was an employee when he did it. He got fired, somehow came back as a consultant. I've seen that happen before. Those are always interesting. That guy got fired from here. He's now with, pick your vendor, big vendor. He's back in. Or he changes his name. Since I got the time here, and I know you're not supposed to do war stories, but you might get a kick out of this one. I went to an organization, and, oh gosh, I'm going to guess 2005, I was doing identity management work for them. They said, hey, you've been around the block, can you take a look at this resume? We're going to hire somebody full-time. I know you're a consultant. And this feeds into this. I said, sure. I took a look at his resume. Well, you know, first red flag, the guy had 8 pages of resume. Second red flag, 4 of them were mine. Changed the company names. Changed the dates. I'm looking at this thing. I go up to them. Here's the problem. I'm a consultant. They don't know any better. They're like, well, how do we know who's who? Now, they had a good idea, and I'm glad they did. They said, get him on the phone. We're going to listen in, which probably violated some laws. I had him going for 45 minutes, buzzing him on questions on this guy. And I will get somewhere with this story. You'll get a kick out of it. Buzzing him on questions left, right, and center. Now, you can't answer any. Finally, at the end, I said, look, I've seen this resume. It's up online. I pointed him to my site where it is. Can you go to that site? Because this is done on the phone. Goes to the site. He goes, oh my God, that's the same as mine. I said, I know. I said, so at this point, he doesn't remember my name. I said, is this your resume or this guy? And he's stammering for 10 minutes. I can't get him to answer the question. Finally said, look, I'm going to have to hang up the phone. You either have to tell me, did you write this or did this guy? And he goes, no, I wrote it. I said, great. I said, there's a phone number on this site. What's that number? Reads it out. I go, look on your phone. Looks on his phone, and all you hear is, oh my God. Right? Well, had him. Admitted the whole thing, said, oh, well, I'm going to change it, which he didn't, by the way, for a while. So that place put him on the old blackball list, said he can't come back in. And the guy had a long name, like a Stalyanowski or something. I'm making this up, by the way. Stalyanowski or something. Okay, great, no problem. 2 years later, through a consulting company, even though he's on the blacklist, he got in through the consulting company because he changed the name. He cut all the letters off. It was Stoy. And what we get, and this is a big problem, are different names from people when they're a consultant to get back into the organization. That is the piece we can't track. And that is why you're hugely at risk of these type of things. By the way, I bumped into him in another place, like 2 years after that. Because IDM, it's not always that big of a world. I mean, yeah, it might be, $10 to $20 billion, and I swear you see the same guys. Look at this show. You come every year. It's like a high school reunion. It's like, oh, I remember you from last year and the year before, and you're still alive, and that's good. High school reunion every year. You see the same people. Nevertheless, he got booted after that. Point is this. We can't track these people effectively. We have too many kickoff points. Partners, students, affiliates, temps, interns, seasonal workers, medical side, you got, registry nurses, affiliates, I may have already said that already, and the like. Too many ways in. We need to centralize. The problem that you're going to see here is that's actually been making the problem a little bit worse. So, this information has come in many forms. We'll shove them in an AD, you'll see, or we use a manual process, a worksheet, and Joe is tracking the worksheet until Joe leaves, people issue. Takes the process out of it because he's the only one doing it, documenting, and never actually documents, the process is broken. Now we want to talk technology, so what do? We think, we'll just fix it 1-2 with the technology approach. People, process, technology. How? I'll put something in that'll automate this thing. I'll shove them all in AD. I'll pick a directory, and what ends up happening? That gets out of whack. Plus, as you'll see, there's other issues with that and costs. All right, the last piece of that is compliance review. Right? Employees, we understand what we have there, hopefully. But with these folks, you may have a rule they can only be here 6 months before they have to be redone, or a month or whatnot. Those are not always done so effectively, especially when we're bringing in IT guys. And, there always seems to be some work around the system. Or what we do is we say, look, the maximum that one of these folks can stay here without a reapproval is 1 year. So what happens? Workarounds. The manager, when he fills out the form, paper form, online form, he has to pick an end date. And what does he do? Makes it for 1 year, even if Todd's only coming in for 30 days. And then from a deprovisioning aspect, nobody thinks about it. Nobody tracks it. Or, hey, he becomes an employee and we lose all of his history. What does he have from an access entitlement right perspective? Data perspective? And we got to talk about that. So we're getting there. And it's not always event-driven. So we have that date, but you guys have probably been here. What happens, right? Todd, the consultant, he's done. He was only supposed to be here 30 days. Of course, I said it for a year. He leaves. How often do those hiring managers notify, whether it's online or others, your HR to tell them they left? Yeah, it's just, I love when people leave because you know what happens when we left? It means it's true, right? That's a huge problem. And there's all kinds of risks associated with that, right? There are potentially, from a cost perspective, licensing, which we'll get into a little more detail, security-related risks, open systems and accounts those people have. Or assets are the other thing. We gave Todd a laptop to use here. Well, I had him in for a year. I didn't even know he left. He left after 30 days. Where's the laptop? That's a problem. I had to fire an employee once over this. And he actually had just shoved it in a corner. I said, but you never gave it back. We didn't have the process internal at the time. It's many, many moons ago. But that organization realized it. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And our guys knew better. One guy did it. Said, not in the security space. Point is, we're not tracking them effectively. So let's, hopefully, there we go. So questions to ask yourself, and this is kind of important, and this will drive us into all of our next steps. How do you managing the licensing for those non-employees? Why am I saying this? Do you stick them in AD today? Because one of the big problems here is when you stick them in AD. And why I'm saying that is, okay, we have a provisioning tool. Or forget provisioning tool. We start with HR. HR goes to either our service desk, provisioning, it's manual, whatever. We have a source of truth, right? We have that system of record for that individual coming out of your HR system, whatever that system is. But for the non-employees, we just give them an AD account. Well, here's the problem. All the employees have AD accounts. And oh, by the way, they may not need an AD account, whether or not we've locked it or not. And we're creating these accounts. Well, there's a cost associated with that. So from a licensing perspective, I'm not even getting into the security aspects of this. And then, what about the disabled user population? So when you disable these accounts, if you want to keep tracking them, what ends up happening? No, we strip out all prior permissions, we stick them in a disabled user's OU, and what did you get? You got a record that says Todd Rossin or John Smith on it. Doesn't help you. He comes back in the organization, or heaven forbid, he did something and somebody needs to do a root cause analysis. What did he have access to? I don't know. These are the problems that keep happening over and over again, and it's also why you shouldn't use AD for these non-employees. AD is, you need network credentials? Okay, give an AD account. It is not there to be that source of truth for a user. Okay. And then you get the risk of over-entitlements. What happens? Listen, Todd's coming in. I know he's a consultant. Give him, or make him like Joe's, right? Cloning. Big, big, big no-no. You shouldn't be doing that for your employees, let alone for your non-employees, because Joe has been here for 20 years now, and he's moved roles so many times, he's just accumulated rights. And because he's not in our ERP system, does work in that, we don't do any kind of attestation against it, right? We don't do any checks against it. So for 20 years, he's been accumulating rights, started in the mailroom, now he's at the C-level, and yet we're still cloning his account. And then Todd comes in, and guess what he gets? Lots. I'm going to see how many people I could shed before this thing is over. I see you. Anyways, I saw you taking pictures, by the way. Here's a cool thing. If you send me an email at the end of this, for anybody who does, because I know you guys do for all of it, send me an email at the end of this, just todd@idmworks.com. I'll send you a copy of this, the whole thing. That way you don't have to kill yourself. All right, anyways, let's keep going here. Non-employees don't have to follow the same rules. This is the other problem. So employee comes in, has to take training. That training is, IT security training, awareness training, other training that's required for his role. So what happens? Well, they don't follow these policies because HR isn't involved. They don't get involved in it. And guess what? He comes in, he hasn't done any of that. He does something wrong that's against policy. You might be just get rid of him because he doesn't get the same HR protections. But he may have done something completely wrong, messed something up, and caused or incurred a fine to the organization. Why? He took identifiable data. He took PII, and he put it out in, he put it on CD. Okay, that was an actual example somewhere, but he put it on a thumb drive, I should go and say. Shows you how old I am. And he took the thumb drive and put it in his pocket, and he left to go do work at home. We got rid of him, but do we know what copies are out there? We have no control over it. He doesn't play by the same rules. And what's his excuse? Had I known it was a rule. This is an old Seinfeld episode. George Costanza, he made out with the cleaning lady, and they're like, we got to fire you. And he's like, listen, had I known it was a rule, it was, frowned upon. That doesn't work. Anyways, that's the problem. Ignorance doesn't clear us. Okay. Let's get and keep going here. So what are our options? Now we get into some of the fun. Maybe. Because there's about 6 options that I have listed out here, and I'll be curious at the end if anybody had any other thoughts or options on it, because I want to keep this a little open. But let's talk about it. Number 1, This is not a bad option, by the way. Require your human resource information system folks to add these non-employees into their system. It's usually like a module or whatnot. And what happens when you say to HR, hey, would you guys start taking on the consultants? Yeah, I don't think so. It's like you ask them to take on vampires, and that's how bad they react. They're like, no, 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 never in a million years, not gonna happen, no. And you go, but no. And it just keeps happening. Nobody wants to take it. I've had maybe, I would say 1 in 10, maybe 1 in 15 organizations that have taken that on. And even then, they get a lot of pushback. So it doesn't happen all that often. Does it work? Totally works, but you might have better luck, building your own car. And I don't know enough about cars to build one. I might have a better chance. You can use an auto-provisioning application to store the worker identities. A lot of the tools right now, the back end, what do they come with? Either some kind of directory or some kind of database. And it used to be not a bad viable option there, but here's the problem. Depending on the vendor and everything changes, all of a sudden they hit you with some crazy license costs. Oh, you were using our directory to store all these people? Well, yeah, that's kind of seemed like common sense to me. Great, here's a $2 million bill. Right? It doesn't seem like it would make sense, but that's exactly what happens. So it's actually not bad, but 2 problems, right? That first one, or good luck if you get hit with that bill, and the second one, you're muddying the waters again, similar to the Active Directory, which you're going to see next, where if everybody in the organization runs through the system, you may have only your in the directory extended for your non-employees, but you may also run into the headache of, since you got everybody in there, if I didn't delineate well enough, it's the same as the next one, AD. What happens? We stick them in AD, which I think I see more often than any other option out there. We stick them in AD, adds to the potential licensing cost. We think we got it licked because we stick them in when they leave the organization in the disabled OU, disabled users OU. We strip everything out, but then we lose all the value of being able to track what they had 2 years ago, 1 year ago. All of the things that maybe if we have an auto-provisioning system, or really if we're still doing it quasi-manual through a ticketing system, we have some kind of track record. Audit, compliance, but we lose a lot in this. The other piece is, and I'm sure you've all been there, what happens when that consultant becomes an employee? Or better yet, employee to a consultant? Do we just say, okay, we'll just shift them, we shift the record? No, we rip the whole thing out. And say, they're terminated, closed it all out. Okay, but he's not leaving, Todd. He's just going from an employee to a consultant or consultant to employee. I want to keep the rights. I don't want to have to start over. You take 4 weeks right now to get those accesses, and I don't remember what they were. Because our stinking access form says, oh, I need access to the ERP system, and I have to remember in this long laundry list what the heck 8675309 is. I got to request that. It turns out it's access to the Tommy Two-Tone database. Here's the problem with that, of course. Now we don't know that aspect. We don't remember that aspect. And what do? Just make it like Joe's. Now I got 20 years of account. I got to move up. I went to consultant, and I got more access rights than ever. But the other problem is we lost all that tracking, all those prior steps, because we stripped out all the things that we track them against. SSN or whatever we might use within your HR system. We don't know to go back there. We don't know how to go back there, how to tie everything out. We lose all of it. So that's why AD just doesn't really work that great for this. Oh, and then there's the unclean data and redundant data aspect. So Todd comes back in, we get him in another account because we stripped it out. The other Todd went to the disabled OU, and we've got this weird redundant data that comes out of it. Or better yet, he went from consultant to employee, and we never turned that one off. So because he's the other one, now he's got T. Rossin 2 as his login name, and he goes, I don't get it. Why do I have T. Rossin 2? I've never left. You can't use your old account anymore. It's locked out. So go to T. Rossin 2. Log in as T. Rossin 2. Where are all my rights? Same problem. We get redundant data. We get ugly data. We get a mess. And then, of course, it's going to get hoisted upon the techs, right? The techies. We're going to say, hey, AutoProv tool, you fix that. Well, that's what? Hey, operations, you fix that. So why when we go in, when we sit down with people and we do an assessment, when we're done asking the relevant questions, sort of the last question we ask is, what makes you want to kill? What makes people want to kill you? And we usually get a chuckle, and then they let it all out. Well, let me tell you something. All right, the next round. All right, stand up a separate directory or database. This actually is not that bad, but here's the thing. You want to go open source, maybe, for example, you go the open source route. You go like an open LDAP or something until you find out that maybe that one forked and it's not open source anymore, and I got to go a couple revisions back or go with the forked one. Or, another example would be, was anyone in here from ForgeRock? Okay, thank God. That would have hurt. For example, or we pick some tool that nobody, here's another directory that nobody realized. Some, Bob's directory. He created it, and he markets it, he says it's free to all, and then your operations gets a call one day, and they say, hey, operations, take care of this, would you? And you're like, what? What is this? What? That's the problem with it. But it is not the worst thing you could do. If you have proper process controls around it, you could stand up a database, you could stand up a directory. But then you got to build some things, which we're going to talk about the buy versus build. You got to build some things into it. Maybe you have to extend the schema. Do you want a portal? Do you just want to use it at the back end and run it all through your IDM tool? Maybe. It gets a little tricky, but we're going to talk about that. And then we can outsource it. Well, this is a fun one, too. There's actually some interesting cloud tools there. Shameless self-promotion, we have one as well, but you don't have to. The point being, there's tools out there that have started to pop up for this. We're not the only one. There's other ones. The point I'm saying in that regard is it is also an added expense, so it's something to keep in mind. And it depends on said organization, said track record, how long they've been around, what do they do, et cetera, is the core competency. Things to always keep in mind, but it's a possibility. The other thing I've seen is a pure vendor management organization. So that's really what I should have said in this as the second piece being, there's companies out there that this is all they do, right? They say, you're going to pay me every time somebody comes in and the vendors come in. So every person the vendor sends in, I get a 3% spiff on monthly till the end of time or whatever that may be. And they manage the 100 vendors you have in the back end. And those are interesting, but they get really, really expensive. And then to go back to the old track record, sometimes they're doing it, and then they do that. And they do that. And they do. Why? Because the technology changes. They're not hiring the best of breed folks out there to take care of these things. And if that starts to break down, you feel the pain. And they go, that's great, now pay me. And they're hard to then get out of the mix. All right, which gets us to the last one. There's a reason I highlighted this. And that's utilize a true non-employee solution, identity solution, and either buy it, make it its own, don't extend it beyond its core competency, if we were to build it, is what I meant to say, or buy it. And we'll talk about that. And I said, remove the frustration, hopefully. Because here's the thing, you still got to plan it right. If you don't do the proper planning, you don't have the proper requirements, you don't do the proper maintenance and support in its regard, you're going to still be frustrated. So let's talk about this. Let's go with building. Okay. So building a solution. What should it have? Now, this is not 100% across the board. You may have a different feel for it. This is what I've seen work for different organizations. Typically, you got to have some kind of web front end, because if you're going to have people be able to go in to these applications to set up people, you want vendors to be able to go in. You have to have some good rule sets around it. The problem with the old paper approach is it does tend to break down. Paper comes in, there's one order they make you fax it in. You're like, couldn't I just walk it to the person? Nope, you got to fax it. Always blows my mind. I don't have a fax machine anymore. We have to pick a place for it if we do this. So no matter what we do, we gotta have that front end, but we also want to have, and we'll talk more on what has to be in a typical front end. You have to have a store. What is going to be that store? Will be directory driven, again, database and the like. It's going to be on-prem, or do you have a data center? Because you might want to make sure you build in things like redundancy, right? High availability, potentially, probably. It depends how many people you onboard. If it's a small audience, maybe not as much. DR. Do you want to go cloud model? You could put it up in an AWS or Azure, AWS, there's others as well. Do you want to do that, use a public cloud model? Do you want to use a hybrid model? There's all kinds of solutions there. The thing to keep in mind is, as you probably heard in some of the other sessions around this, is you got to be careful on the public cloud model. You're moving your risk to them. However, doesn't mean it's not going to break. Look, my organization being all of 150 people, we utilize Google's business services for that. And you think that'd be great, and I know they're here, but you know what? Sometimes the thing just stops working. Now they've gotten a lot better, but nothing's perfect. 5 nines be darned. Nothing is perfect. So it's things to keep in mind, things to make sure you understand going into it. The other is, from an information perspective, with GDPR these days, especially if so you're dealing with anything from the European side of the house, it gets even more difficult, especially when you're talking about putting out in a public model. Right? Or if you have rules that say you have to keep this data in the U.S., got to know exactly which servers. They'll charge you a little more to make sure it's only in a U.S. server, but they're available. The point is, you got to make sure you understand those from a complexity environment, and those rules and those requirements before you make such a move. Next up, standards. If you're building it yourself, standards. Go with standards, because as anyone here who's built like a legacy provisioning tool now, I say legacy, built their own provisioning tool, I go to orgs where, hey, we built this thing 20 years ago, we just keep adding to it, and now we want to go to a vendor tool, and they look at it and they go, how am I going to unravel this spaghetti-coated mess? If I shut this off and move it over, because I don't want to do it all at once, I want to sprint this thing in, do bits and pieces, get everybody happy, I shut it off, and 5 other things break, and you're like, so I turn it back on, 6 other things broke. It's the problem there. So standards. Next up, support. How are you going to support this thing? You're going to want to build in some kind of self-registration aspect to this. Because if you're going to have vendors, you're going to have folks coming in, you want them to be able to come in, put in the required data. There should be administrative registration as well. They come in and the manager needs to do it. But you got to enforce it. So when you build these aspects in, has to be enforced. And when I say enforced, I don't just mean that they have to fill out a field, but you have to be able to say, this SSN they put in, if we're usually an SSN they have to put in, already exists. Or guess what? Previous to that, I put in a couple that are the typicals, because what happens? I come in, it's 555-555-5555. Same with like a phone number. If you have to have that data, you have to have these rules. Bless you. All right, so entitlement management. First, automate and truly enforce the account expiration and disable. Now, some organizations do it okay, and then they remind you 2 weeks before, and if it's 30 days, it's really a mess. But you have to really build this process well. Also, when you build that disable process, you might want to even have some slack time. We found this in organizations where they actually did this, built their own. They put in a 3 months you have to come back in, and what happened was it started reminding managers 2 weeks before, and that person's manager didn't delegate, which is the other piece of it. You have to be able to delegate this. Never delegated it, and even if you have it, didn't delegate, went out of the country for 2 weeks, came back, and he had onboarded at the time a whole bunch of people for a particular need all at once. They all lost access. And that organization, you know what they did when you lose the access? Stripped everything out. So he's like, oh God, make them all like Joe's. That was a mess. You must have a bulk load method. So that's why standards are good. If you're going LDAP v3 compliant, usually you can use things like for a bulk load, like a LDIF file, right? You can do a whole bunch of LDAP adds in. The rationale here being that it's going to happen. 2 things will happen. Either you're going to need to onboard a whole bunch of people at once for projects or whatnot, or there's going to be some M&A thing that goes on, and they say, hey, can you get all their consultants? I got 1,000 of them in. Right? Account vetting, account claiming. This is where it starts to get interesting. We have a lot of organizations that, because they're temp workers, they need to create these accounts in mass. But they don't have time for them to call the help desk. I got 1,000 people joining. I'll give you an example. We did once for an insurance firm, and they had to onboard, I think it was like 1,000 adjusters, insurance adjusters, when Katrina hit. And these guys are all, they're kind of part-time. They may have worked in the organization before, up to 10 years ago. And they come back and they ramp up with these guys. They're basically consultants. They come in, they help, and then they roll off again. So the problem they were having is they came in and they swamped the help desk so much, they lost all this time. It was a big headache. And people needed their claims. They couldn't get anybody onboarded. So there needed to be a method to be able to turn these folks back on, basically like a federated model. Right? They come in, they answer 1 or 2 questions, we give them a code, they come in, update their password. Or maybe we just want to have people's accounts pre-created, and we want them to get a one-time use code. And now when they actually walk in to get their badging, the badging person hands them that one-time use code. They come in, they get their machine, they walk up to it, they have to put that one-time use code in. They at the time then have to set up their challenge response questions so that we can actually get some money, usage out of our password management tool, and then change their password right there. And answer any other questions we need, training, get it all done. So these are things you may want to consider building in. And then, of course, you got to have it guided. I hate to say it, but, there's still a segment of the population that can't look at a screen and fill things out without having the hand-holding. I remember when my grandmother called me one day, and she said, Todd, this was granted like 10 years ago. I just took a computer class. Which do I need first, a computer or a web page? And I'm a wise ass, so I almost told her a web page, but I stopped myself. She wasn't my favorite grandma. So, and then you have to have the ability to customize this thing. Attributes are going to change, or at least the values that are the requirements behind it are going to change. We have to be able to extend this as things change. The rule is now we can't ask for their SSN, for example, or date of birth, or whatever it may be. We need to be able to customize these, maybe ask for different things, etc. Okay, last but not least, well, actually not last but not least, 2 things. You're going to want to optimize this if you're going to be able to support BYOD. So that may be a mobile version. Maybe you're going to have a version that sits out in the DMZ. People can access those guys. That's more limited, etc. The other piece of it is, can it also support Auth-N and Auth-Z? Can it get back to them even, those credentials? Or does it need to support single sign-on? Or the ability from a federated model to use credentials. So, hey, you can log in, you can use your Google ID to come in, and we track based on that, and that's an acceptable ID to create your initial access request. And then once you have a corporate one, but we want to track that too. We want to keep track of that ID, because after Todd gets walked to the door and he comes back in again under a new name, he might use the same ID. All right. So what does this mean? Components. Well, this is sort of the extension of that. So the things that we just spoke about, what are the bits and pieces? I'm not going to bore you with all the bits and pieces. Again, I'm happy to send it. But these are the key pieces if you're going to do this, you're going to want to support. And it falls under these specific things: password management, account management, the notifications and the model, who gets notified, how do we do audit of those entitlements initially through this system, even if it's now utilizing an auto-provisioning tool to create everything. How about those key pieces before? The authentication options. Does it need to support things like OAuth, SAML, etc.? Support and configuration options. How difficult is it? What do we support? What do we allow for things to tie in or have us tie into? True import-export ability. Because if you get picked off, you want to be able to give all this data in a nice, easy, clean format to the company that is now going to be buying the organization or merging, or vice versa. You want to be able to get that and import it. And then we talked about identity vetting, things like account claiming. I talked about the little use case, get them in here, get their challenge response, etc. And then tie it into something. What are we tying it into? Well, how about a third-party auto-provisioning tool? Or that ugly mess of a legacy tool that we built? All right. So you have to have a proper onboarding process, not just onboarding, you'll see beyond that. This is where it gets a little tricky. I used, from our own tool, some screenshots, but I stripped out a lot of the pieces that it would say us, specifically because I want you to understand that it was just easier for me to use something from a mock-up perspective. But basically, how do you do it? So one of the flows we've seen work, and this has been a real good one, is you can be invited to the party, so to speak. I'm a hiring manager. I want to get resources. This vendor is going to do it, so they get invited, or that non-employee, we've picked the person, and I just want to send this to them. It can go to there again, Todd at Gmail kind of thing, and let them come in. They accept it. They get a one-time use code. They agree to all the things they have to agree to, the consent forms, the electronic policy, all the things you need them to agree to. Changes their password, fills that out. What is our process? So this is a process we've built, but something similar is what I'm referring to. And the attributes are kind of dumbed down here, just the basics that we want. But the things that we need. What do we need to track about this person? Disable needs to be super simple. It needs to be as simple as a one-click option if possible. Because you're not going to be able to have the hammer on managers if you make it difficult. Now, comes the quick, I'm only going to do this quick. We do have our own solution. I'm going to make this one 2 minutes because I want questions. 2 minutes or less, right? You'll notice something here. We have our own built. We also utilize our own LDAP gateway model. We have connectors to various systems. Why is that important? It's a little bit of an auto-provisioning light aspect to it, but realistically, you're probably going to go out to a fully fledged system out there, like you see here, one of the many auto-provisioning tools that are out there, for example. But you may have difficult systems that you need to tie in initially before you go down that. So ours, in our case, we have a model for that with all the connectors that we've built, which are somewhere in the realm of like 70 or 80 now. We utilize a drag and drop model to extend the product itself. By the way, feel free to copy this. You're going to go do this on your own. You're going to build your own. You could hand this off, tell your guys, go build your own. That's assuming you want to do the build model. We like a buy model. In our case, this thing can live in the cloud. We have our own hosting as well, so from a private hosting model as well as a hybrid model, or on-prem in your own data center. Long story short, all those bits and pieces, and this is actually, believe it or not, probably a year old, the pieces here. We've got even more now that we've added to ours. Where I want to leave this, though, and I want to open this up to any questions, but I don't want to leave it as just questions. And I told you the other piece, 2 minutes or less than our own. I want you to, if you want to copy this first, Todd at IDMWORKS.com, I'll probably say it one more time before I leave, but I want to get your ideas here. I don't want to just leave this as, hey, throw me a question. You can question, I'm happy to answer any questions, but what have you seen work? What have you seen fail? We've got a little less than 10 minutes. We got anything from anybody? There we go.
So I don't know if this works, but you have the capability, or have you heard of where the vendors who supply consultants may do the maintenance?
Supply companies do the maintenance. Oh, you mean like an outsourced vendor model where you have a standard vendor and they all come through this vendor and they do it? It can work. I say it can work. You run the same issues that we had brought up earlier, which is it may work wonderfully at first, and then all of a sudden things just seem to fall off the map. They're not keeping up with it. All of a sudden there's an issue and we start looking at another vendor. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that. It's the same when organizations outsource to one of the they outsource like all their IT. You outsource it all to like your IBMs or all these big firms where all they have is this gigantic machine. And then you say, well, you guys are going to be doing the IDM portion, and what happens? It doesn't go so well. Because that's not their core competency. They're hiring low end on the tech side to take care of this stuff, and there's going to be a lot of turnover. So somebody knows it, they've got it down, it turns over. Same thing happens with processes and procedures, those same companies. It's going okay, there's some kind of turnover event, all of a sudden I don't get what happened. We had these great SLAs they were hitting, we haven't hit one in 6 months. That's the unfortunate aspect of it, I will say. And I've seen that time and again, but hey, it may work. It may work for you. Mm-hmm.
But don't they need their ID to get into the compliance training?
Not necessarily. So now we're talking a little more on use case, right? And that's okay. We've got some time. So one of the examples I brought up was, and because we've seen it, we've done it, an organization that has a basic pre-created account. They come in, but then they have to do this, well, they'll get basic credentials in some cases I've seen where they can come in, log in. They can't get to anything. All that stuff shut off. The only thing they get when they use that first login is a screen that says, do the following. whether it's the training, acceptance, etc., or you saw the example, the one-time use password, one or the other. We've seen it that way. They come in, they complete it, it gets attached to the record because it's the same record, and now that it's complete, it gets opened up and it says, okay, you got your login name, and you got your one-time use password, now you have to change the password, or maybe change it again, or whatever that is, and go that model. The other way we've seen it is more of a kiosk mode, where to get into it and do the training, it's not necessarily tied to the record yet. I come in and it's a kiosk mode, it's anonymous. But I've come in, I got okayed, you know, I'm at wherever it is, I shake hands with the proper person, I show them it's my ID, maybe it's HR, maybe it's not, whoever that is, and they have to first go to a kiosk of some sort again, or a room with a bunch of computers. It's an anonymous system, or because it's anonymous, depending on what it is, you may give them one-time use type code that's tied to their personal address. Remember I said like a Todd at Gmail account? They come in, they do that aspect, they finish the training. Now when they show up on day one, they get their ID, you know, they show their ID, they get their ID, they finish that process. Yeah.
And the other thing I was going to say is, so to the other topic, have you seen it work where, you know, so a lot of times you have a contingent worker system, right, where they get paid out of, right? So your staff augmentation gets paid out of this other system. You know, by integrating that into your, you know, your flow, if you will, that also helps with the cutting off, right? Obviously, managers care that they're not when they're paying these people who've left. It's when the two systems are disparate that they don't care about the accuracy, they just care about the pay.
Right, well, it's typically with employees, HR only cares about paying employees and how they pay their employees. Vendor management deals with the payments, and then that's a different story. You know, go, oh, we only pay our vendors net 30, net 45, net 60, whatever it is. Totally different model. So in that case, yeah, it does help if you can tell them that person's gone before the invoice is, some orgs have an auto invoice model, you know, they put their hours in, it has to be approved. The problem is if they haven't gone that route, or they come through a big company, they come through one of these giant consulting companies that get a supplying 10,000 people, you're never gonna know for certain, they're just the invoice. So it's hard to tie those out. From the disabled standpoint, it's less typically on non-employees about the payment. It's typically more about, where's my laptop? Where's the badge? Where's the, you know, whatever we gave them? Or the fact that they still got these open accesses out there. Those typically are the drivers when it comes to the non-employee side, less so the payment. Because the fun thing about the payment is, if we've got an issue, we dispute it. Typically, we haven't paid them yet because it's a longer cycle as opposed to an employee. Yeah. So it tends to be very different. So we got 2.5 minutes left. Any other questions or things that you've seen work or not work?
So we created our own, and what we have, what we see work is we have what we call a temp to perm or a perm to temp process, and you know, we channel that through so that it's the same, you know, plan ID, right? That in our case they have a personal identification number that works like an employee ID,
Mm-hmm.
and then that is tied to their plan ID. Because in our case, there's a lot of things they do need, you know, that requires them to have a plan ID. So it's
But it's a separate unique identifier is what you're saying.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
called a personal identification number.
Oh, there you go.
And therefore, that unique identifier, you know, that part can go away, right? But then take their plan ID and now tie it to their employee ID.
Yep. I'm actually glad you brought that up because I didn't really highlight that. It was on one of the slides, and I didn't go into a lot of detail on that one. But yeah, any tool that you come out with, whether you build it yourself or you buy a tool, you have to be able to have that unique identifier. That's one of the pitfalls, really, when you think about things like AD and whatnot, is they got their own, but we're disabling, we're getting rid of the account, all that goes away, including the tracking. So that's actually good to hear, but you're just right on the money. You have to have a unique identifier. The employee doesn't necessarily even need to know it. You may want them to know it, you may have uses for it, but no matter what, you want to have something to tie them against, because how do you know I'm the same Todd Rossin as before? How do you know I'm the same John Smith as before? Now, we may screw up and give him 2 when he comes back in because we didn't tie it to any other data, but that's the other aspect of what I was saying. If we don't tie it effectively to things, it doesn't do that much for us. But the whole point to it is to use it for those reasons. Yeah, but that's a great point. Anyone else? Well, oh, we got one. Go ahead.
You know, this is one of the ways
your HR. I know, I'm just playing. I know you said that, yeah. Right. Do you have a vendor management group? You have a vendor management group? Oh. Right. This is where, from a buy versus build perspective, believe it or not, where buy tends to work a little better. Just because now you're making somebody else do it because you don't want to own it, and they have to basically take your requirements, make sure that said system runs around those specific requirements. If you're talking about making sure things like the people leave, the processes that, hey, somebody has to come in and hit the disable button, yeah, that's typically just your hiring manager. But beyond that, or who that person's manager, I should say, beyond that, you shouldn't have to do much beyond it, right? They should still have to come in. You can't give them access until this thing is filled out. If you're tying it into an auto-provisioning system, it can't give them access without it. And hopefully that system of yours has rules around it so they can't skirt it. They can't put in incorrect data. They can't put in 555555555, right? You shouldn't have to babysit it is what I'm saying. You should not have to babysit it. It shouldn't be that difficult from a tech perspective, just a typical care and feeding. Yeah, the system, if it's got to be patched, whoever takes care of your systems from that perspective, that's a different story. But there shouldn't be that long-standing need to have developers on staff to deal with it. If you're doing that, you might as well buy the thing if it's going to be that difficult, because from a stakeholder perspective, really, there's not a ton of stakeholders that you're going to get on that. Somebody on the business just from a hammer perspective to say, hey, managers, or Joe over here, you haven't been taking out these users. You've been warned. And I hate to say it, since Joe's an employee, that's when me as the stakeholder, the person responsible, may have to get an HR person involved to say, hey, Joe, you've been warned twice. Here's a formal process. Get this thing down. Now, the more we can automate, the better, because it takes the impetus off of Joe. If we know these people are only going to be here for 30 days, we force it 30 days. Or do you do the thing of the 3 months, and then every 3 months you've got to update it, which is also a pain in the butt. The point being, though, well, actually, let me take that one step back. Instead of putting it on him, even better, this account claiming process I referred to. Every 3 months, that person has to reclaim their account. They get a notice. You've got 1 week. Here's the one code. You're allowed to do this up to 4 times before Joe has to come in. Joe knows you're there. It's an internal account, so we know they're still here internally. It's not using an external account. They have to come in and re-up themselves, self-service. And by the way, when they do you know who gets notified? Joe, he's the manager. He knows that Todd just re-upped. We reverse it and make it more of a notification model and put it back on the user. You put it back on the user, they're going to do it because they can't afford to lose access. Joe just needs to know about it, so we're covered. It's not perfect, but we audit that as well. If we do this right, we want to have all of those emails that get generated, all that data that gets generated. It's got to be audited. If you don't have good logging built in and good auditing, you're asking for trouble, because all of these things need to be tracked. I need to know that it was Colonel Mustard with a candlestick at the library. Yeah. Any other questions? Good thing is I know the guy who's going next. It's my co-CEO, so if he's got to wait a minute or two, he won't care. It's not on the screens, but we've got, I think we got like 11 sales guys here, so we can show it. I hope so. Gosh, I hope so. If not, we did a horrible job of that, didn't we? So if you come down, I can show it to you, or one of our guys will be able to show it, yeah. Yeah. Yep. Also, you're more than welcome to shoot us an email, and we can show it to you sometime over WebEx as well if you want to be able to go in the weeds. Because we also have the ability to host it, what we do sometimes is we'll stick a copy up in an AWS that's dummied up and say, hey, play with it. See what you like about it. By the way, again, Todd at IDMWORKS.com if you want a copy of this. I know I've said that like 100 times. It's like those commercials, right? What was the one that we all remember? Head on, directly to the forehead. Head on, and they just repeat it over and over and over again. I've had the Love That Chicken from Popeye song stuck in my head for like 3 months now. Anyways, any other questions before Paul comes on up here? All right, Paul, you're up. Thank you.